Have you ever said, I need to get my life together, but nothing actually changes? You don't stay consistent, you don't fix your habits, and you don't follow through. But it's not because you're lazy, it's because you never planned the hardest part of change. That's the part that almost no one talks about. And if you miss it, you'll stay stuck in the exact same cycle. Well, in this video, I'm gonna give you 4 practical ways that you can change your life, but then the last one is why most people fail. Hey, my name is Michael Thompson. I'm a husband, youth pastor, and PhD student, and on this channel we discuss personal and professional development from a Christian perspective. And this video assumes a couple of things. One of them is that you have a sense of direction, you know where you're going in life, and then you also know that something in your life is keeping you from changing, and the question is, how do you actually follow through? Well, you have to stop lying to yourself. That's the first thing. And you have to be honest and stop blaming other factors. Maybe your parents didn't teach you discipline and you didn't grow up with a lot of opportunities, or your environment really did make things harder. That all may be true. But at some point, if you keep using all these things as an excuse, it becomes a permission slip for you to stay stuck. And you can't control everything that's happened in your past, but you can take responsibility for what happens in the future. And you also need to be honest. You might have hated your situation, but if you're still doing the same old things, then you don't hate your situation enough. And a lot of people say that they want to change, but then when it really comes time to change, they don't want to take on that responsibility. I know some people that say you got to take the bull by the horns. You have to actually take some ownership here. And I've heard people say that they're underpaid, but then you ask them about finances and they don't have a budget. And then I've heard people say that they hate their job, and you ask them about the school or education that they're going to need to move forward, and they're not willing to do that. And then they say that they want better habits and to be healthy. You ask them about the gym, and they don't do that thing either. So if you're not willing to change these things, obviously you don't hate your situation enough. And maybe that's the solution, is you just need to be a little more frustrated with where you're at. You also need to stop waiting until you feel like it. This is where a lot of people lose. They wait for motivation, they wait for energy, and they wait for the perfect mood. But in reality, a disciplined person doesn't build their life based on feelings. They build their life based on logical decisions. Simply stated, act first, feel later. And a lot of the time, the feeling that you want, it comes after the action. There's so many times in my life where I didn't feel like making a decision, but I chose to make the decision anyways, knowing that the feelings would follow later. And then at the end of the day, you don't want to live your life based on feelings anyways. So if you make logical decisions, understanding that the actions are going to follow later, you're going to be much more happy with where you end up in life, and you're going to stop waiting until you feel like it to make the right decision. Second, track what matters. Here's a simple rule. If you don't track it, then it's probably not as much of a priority as you think it is. And that sounds harsh, but numbers expose reality because feelings are vague, memories are unreliable, but numbers actually tell the truth. And numbers don't tell everything, but I've seen numbers really show me where I was making mistakes in the past. Recently I started setting a goal of 20 hours every single week. I'm gonna work on my PhD classes. And whenever I write down every single day the number of hours that I put in, then whenever I got distracted, that's fine that I got distracted, but at the end of the day, the number actually tells the truth, and the number doesn't make excuses. Here's what you should track. Number 1, you should track your time and responsibilities. Do you think you're staying on top of things until you miss something important? And often that's because you didn't write it down and it wasn't in a calendar. Really effective people, they track their time, and they're highly effective with their time. They don't trust their memory for important things. They use a calendar. And they also track their progress. It's exciting to say that I want to lose 10 pounds in 10 weeks, okay? That's exciting, and a lot of people say things like that. But if in week 5 you realize that you only lost 1 pound, then the numbers actually show you your progress. But if you don't write that down, a lot of times you set goals, and then you don't set a timeline for the goal or whatever, and you don't have numbers written down, so you really have no idea how you're doing according to the goal that you set. And there's a disconnect between your goal and your actions. But that's not meant to discourage you. The numbers aren't supposed to make you frustrated. They're supposed to wake you up and help you see if you're actually making progress on what you said you want to do. Also, another thing that you need to track with a number is your finances. A lot of people, they feel stressed about money, and you say the word budget and they just don't want to do it, and they don't start small, and they have no idea where their money is going. But when you know how much money you make, you write it down, you actually have a number, and you keep up with the budget, and then you know how much it costs you to live, then you have so much clarity in life, and that clarity is free. And you can't manage what you refuse to measure. So measure your time, measure your money, and measure your progress when you set a goal, and work back from that goal and write those things down. Third, stop trying harder. This one, it surprises a lot of people because most people think that change happens by trying harder. More effort, more pressure, more motivation, more emotion. And the reality is trying harder, it's not the same as changing wisely. And the reality is feelings quit, but plans don't. So you need to make sure that you have a plan. And your feelings, they're inconsistent. Some days you'll feel focused, some days you'll feel tired, some days you'll want to give up. And this is why feelings make a terrible foundation for change. So you need a plan. You need a written down plan that you're gonna follow whenever you wanna change. Also, identity drives behavior. A lot of people, they try to change without changing their identity, but your habits usually follow the story that you believe about yourself. If you see yourself as lazy, then you're gonna keep acting lazy. And if you see yourself as undisciplined, then you're gonna keep proving it. But if you see yourself as somebody who never follows through, again, your life is gonna match that belief. But if you change the way you think and you say, I'm gonna become a disciplined person, I'm a student who takes studying seriously, I'm a healthy person, or I'm a leader, then your actions are so much more likely to line up with the kind of person that you see yourself as, because behavior change gets so much stronger when you actually change your identity. You also need to ask yourself the right questions. Before you commit to change, ask yourself, is this really worth it? Do the people in my life support this? Do I believe that I can do this? What will help me succeed? Also ask yourself, what will probably get in my way? And a lot of people, they never ask these questions. And they just get excited, they make a goal, and then they don't make a plan. And then in reality, they don't meet the goals that they set. So here it is, the fourth step, why most everyone isn't able to change their behavior because they skip this step. And that is because they don't plan for the barriers that they're gonna come up against. Whenever you try to make a change to your character, that is very, very difficult, and a lot of times people underestimate how hard that is, because waking up earlier sounds easy until you try to do it every day. Reading sounds easy until you're tired. Getting off your phone sounds easy until you're bored, and then going to the gym sounds easy until life gets super busy. Because behavior change is difficult, and so you have to think, if I want to go to the gym, what is it that's gonna keep me from going to the gym in 4 weeks? You know, if I want to read more, what is it that's gonna hold me back from reading? It's that planning of the barriers that you're gonna interact with, and then planning for a solution. Say in 3 weeks, when I find it difficult to go to the gym, instead of just quitting in 3 weeks, I'm going to, whatever it is, reduce the time of the workout. Or whenever you're discouraged about your reading, you're going to read less, but you're gonna make a habit of doing it every single day. So we could call this a barrier plan. And before you change, ask yourself, what is it that is most likely to stop me from this change? What am I gonna do when that barrier happens? So identify that barrier and then decide what you'll do about it. Just 2 steps, identify and decide. And if you do that, whenever you're trying to change your behavior, you are doing the most important step that so many people skip. And a couple of the questions that are helpful are, how strongly do you actually believe that this change is worth it? Because if you don't really believe it's worth it, you're not gonna stick with the change. Ask yourself, do you have the support from the people around you? Because if you want to change something and say you're married and your wife doesn't want you to change that much, or she doesn't care, then it's gonna be a lot harder. And another question that you need to ask is, do you actually believe that it's possible? Because one of the guys that I listen to, Cal Newport, says that your brain will hijack the decisions that you make. If you don't actually internally think it's possible, then you're not gonna stick with that behavior change. Ask yourself, do you have a realistic understanding of the barriers you're gonna come up? And then the last question, do you know what supports will help you keep going? What is it that you can get what are the things you can do to support yourself whenever times get difficult? And all these questions are so much better than asking, how do I get motivated? And then another idea is that you need a plan for failure. This is very important because anytime you try to change, you're not gonna do it perfectly, but what are you gonna do when you mess up? When you miss a workout, or you overspend 1 week, you waste more time in a day, whatever, you get off track of whatever goal it was. The question is not, will you fail at some point? Because you will. It's, what are you gonna do when you fail, and how are you gonna get back on track? And so many people, they stop their habits, they get off track one day, and then they're done. But if you're really gonna change, you're gonna do this most important step, which is speculate those barriers and then put together a plan for when you come up against those barriers. And remember, if you fail, that's okay. What's gonna be your plan to get back on the wagon. If I look back and I look at the most important changes that I've made to my life, that it wasn't something that just happened and I didn't fail. It was a change that I wanted to make, but then it took falling off the wagon and getting back on. And so after a while, I've just really realized that planning for failure is incredibly important. So speculate the barriers that are gonna come up against your behavior change, and then have a plan for whenever you fail. Don't quit. Have a plan to get back on the wagon so that your change in your life actually becomes real. So if you want to actually change your life, stop lying to yourself, track what actually matters, stop trying harder without a plan, and prepare for the barriers that are going to show up, because insight alone, knowledge alone doesn't change your life, and good intentions or motivation alone don't either. If you want to change, you need to be honest with yourself, you need to put in place systems, and you need to make sure that you have the right identity and preparation. And those things actually lead to behavior change. So if you can learn to plan the hard part, not just the exciting part, then you're gonna be way ahead of most people. And if this video helped you in any way, hope you'll subscribe to the channel and share it with someone who's serious about growing personally and professionally, and doing so with Christian values. And remember, your life doesn't usually change just because you feel inspired. It changes when you build a plan, and then when you're strong enough to say, you know what, I'm gonna fail, and when I fail, here's my plan to get back to it.